Hi, I'm Owen Canfield with the opinion page here at the Oklahoman for today's weekly look at what went on at the Capitol this week. Joined by phone again this week, as I was last week, by Mike McNutt, our chief correspondent at the state Capitol. Mike, you doing okay this morning?
You bet. How you doing, Owen?
Good. Long week for you and Julie Bisbee at the Capitol this week, and I know it'll be a long day today in an effort to get the legislature adjourned 1 week early, give them a long holiday weekend and let them get on their way. Before we talk about a couple issues that need to get resolved today, let's just look at a couple things that got finished this week that got resolved. One was tort reform, lawsuit reform. The bill was presented a couple of weeks ago, or settled on a couple of weeks ago. The governor actually signed the bill this week. I think all parties involved consider that a win-win. The doctors who wanted some more help, the attorneys signed off on it. Both sides of the aisle signed off. So really, at least on its surface, a nice piece of legislation to kind of wrap the session up with, Mike.
Yeah, the governor signed it yesterday, and everyone was expecting him to because he had been monitoring the negotiations and apparently had signed off on the agreement just a week ago. But yeah, everybody seems to be at least saying they're happy with the bill. I think both sides, in honesty, would like a little bit more, but it's a start, and I think that's what the governor and the chamber and the Republican leadership are saying. But at least we'll get this underway and see how it works out. And if more needs to be done, they can come back in a couple of sessions, a couple of years, and tinker with it.
Sure. Well, it's been a very contentious issue through the years, and it's nice to sort of, at least for a while, to kind of have it behind them. Another bill that made it through the legislature just last night, Thursday night, was a bill that would give the state some guidelines as to how and when to sell water to out-of-state interests. This is a bill of great interest to folks in North Texas. There are a couple entities down there that would like to buy Oklahoma water. There's plenty of Oklahoma water flowing out of the state every year unused. They would like to tap into that to help their region of the state of Texas. And the legislature has passed a bill that gives some guidelines as to when and how that can happen. You might just touch briefly on what that bill would do, and also I'll ask you whether you think the governor will sign off on that bill, Mike.
Well, the one thing the bill does not do, which is pretty important, it does not allow for any sale of water to another state. But as you mentioned, it does set up some guidelines and some conditions that have to be met. That all of Oklahoma's water needs, must be met before they can consider an out-of-state offer. And this is seen as a way of showing to the courts that the state is working and is trying to take care of its resources internally. It is not just hoarding or letting a resource go untapped. So it sets some guidelines up and procedures. And I think the governor was sign it. His office was involved in the actual language of the bill. This bill only came out Wednesday night in the House, about 11 o'clock. And as you mentioned yesterday, the Senate passed it. So a lot of tinkering of language. I think that the legal staff of both the governor's office and the legislative leadership feel confident there's enough there that might influence the judge or say, look, the state does have some water needs to address. And the big concern is you don't want to get a long-term contract with another state, and then you find out that there's some communities in Oklahoma who need that water.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what transpires. My impression is that the folks in Texas don't think this bill really does enough to help them, and that they still feel very confident that they will win in court in December. But that'll be determined down the road. A couple other bills, briefly, Mike, before we move on to today's business. 10 Commandments. There will be a 10 Commandments monument erected on the Capitol grounds. And the governor yesterday signed a bill that related to abortion procedure. That was both of those, of course, these measures were Republican-backed measures, conservative measures, and the governor decided he would sign those. I thought those were both the abortion bill in particular, a very interesting piece of legislation that the governor signed off on.
Yeah, he didn't have much to say about it when he signed off. He didn't say anything actually, and right. So one thing we hope to ask him today is why he signed it, and it's one of those. It's not a huge pro-life bill, but it's one more that the pro-life forces feel that is necessary. It does prohibit anyone from having an abortion because of they don't like the sex of the child. There's no proof that that's going on in the state at this time, but people just want to make sure that they have it in place. The other thing it does, which has a more immediate impact, is it does set up a reporting, a rather detailed reporting process for physicians and who provide abortions. There's a whole more detail on what is reported when an abortion is performed.
Right. Now, as to the issues of the day today at the Capitol, we're talking here on Friday with Mike McNutt from the Capitol Bureau of the Oklahoman. The budget is the last thing to get knocked out. They'll work all day on making sure that that gets done. What are the prospects, Mike, for not you having to be there until midnight tonight?
Well, they won't be here till midnight because both houses passed resolutions that said they were trying to end their business by 5 o'clock today. Now, of course, they can always suspend that or suspend the resolutions, but there's really a desire to finish the business at a more reasonable hour. They worked some late nights. Both the House and Senate worked to nearly midnight on Wednesday, but there's a feeling that the Senate wants to get out by noon, and maybe the House can get out by 5. To do that, the House, it takes a little longer in the House to get bills passed. It's 101 members versus 48, and there's a little bit more discussion, questioning of rules. So the process bogs down a little bit. But they do want to try to get out, and they probably will be out by 5 o'clock this evening. One of the things they have to do is, the House did pass the General Appropriations Bill, the big budget bill. After the Senate passed it Wednesday, the House passed it Thursday. And there was some discussion. The Democrats, House Democrats, kind of put up a lot of a session full of frustration and kind of went after that Republican leadership a little bit for not using some of their revolving funds. They got about $5.5 million, not using that for some other agency. But at the end of the day, the Democrats all rallied behind the budget because the governor, who's a Democrat, of course, signed off on the budget agreement. So they don't want to get the governor mad at them if they didn't pass the budget. So the agreement itself is passed. Now, as you mentioned, there's a number of individual bills that set up funding sources to finance some of the departments and to try to make up some of those cuts that were done to these agencies. There's about 5 or 6 of those bills. A couple of those still have not been heard. So to provide some of that funding, those bills have to pass yet.
And one other thing that they're going to try to get done today, they've revived what was originally called Senate Bill 1111 that dealt with accountability and testing, removing that from the State Department of Education and putting it under another agency. That original bill died, but there's a last-ditch attempt here on this final day of the session to sort of revive that bill. Does it look like that may happen, Mike?
Yeah, they've been working on that the past 48 hours. And as you recall, when the governor vetoed that bill, he did encourage legislators to keep working. He liked the concept. He just didn't think the way they had set it up in that bill was a cost-effective measure. So they've been working. Both Senator Jolly and Representative Genney have been scurrying back and forth the past couple of days, trying to get language that will pass muster from both houses and the governor's office. So that should be coming through late this morning, maybe early this afternoon. And if not, they'll bring it up next session. But they sure like to get that thing done this year.
Mike, thank you for joining us today, the final day of the legislative session. You can read Mike's stories in the Oklahoman and read more about it here on News OK as well.